Show me. Show me.
Clayface, 2026. What if becoming a superhero's greatest enemy didn't start with superpowers, but with a man simply trying to save his face? DC Studios is taking one of Batman's strangest villains and turning him into something we haven't really seen before. A full-blown body horror movie. Clayface is coming to theaters on October 23rd, 2026, directed by James Watkins, the filmmaker behind Speak No Evil. And judging by everything we've seen so far, this may be one of the darkest and most disturbing projects in the new DC universe. So let's take a look at what we know, some interesting facts about the movie, and why Clayface could become one of DC's biggest surprises. For casual Batman fans, Clayface might simply be the giant monster made of mud, but the character has a surprisingly tragic history. Clayface is one of DC's most famous shapeshifters, a character who can change his appearance, imitate other people, and use his body almost like a living weapon. DC itself describes him as a virtually indestructible shape-shifting monster who has both fought Batman and, at times, even been an ally. But this movie appears to be taking a much more human approach. The story follows Matt Hagen, played by Tom Rhys-Harris, a rising Hollywood actor whose life takes a horrifying turn. After his face is disfigured, he becomes desperate to restore himself. And that's where science, ambition, and Clayface enter the story. One of the most interesting things about this movie is that Clayface isn't being treated like a conventional superhero villain. This is being presented as body horror. Think less traditional superhero spectacle, and more psychological horror, transformation, obsession, and the fear of losing control of your own body. The screenplay comes from horror filmmaker Mike Flanagan, who originally developed the project after being inspired by the character. Flanagan has said that his fascination with Clayface goes back to Batman, the animated series, particularly the famous Feet of Clay storyline. But Flanagan isn't directing the movie. That job went to James Watkins, whose previous work includes Eden Lake and Speak No Evil. And honestly, that's a very interesting combination. Flanagan brings the emotional and psychological horror, while Watkins brings a much more brutal and unsettling visual style. Here's a fascinating fact. Mike Flanagan first pitched the idea of a standalone Clayface movie years before it officially became part of the new DC universe. The project was eventually greenlit by DC Studios in December 2024. But Flanagan couldn't direct it because of his other commitments. James Watkins eventually took over as director. So the movie we're getting is essentially the evolution of an idea that had been developing for years. Important detail is that Clayface isn't just some random Batman spin-off. It's part of James Gunn, Peter Safran's new DC universe. That makes the movie particularly interesting because DC is apparently willing to experiment with completely different genres. We've already seen superhero action, animation, and comedy in the new DC era. Now we're getting horror, and Clayface could show just how flexible this new DC universe really is. Director James Watkins has also talked about the horror influences behind the movie. One particularly interesting reference is the classic French horror film Eyes Without a Face from 1960, a disturbing story centered around identity, physical transformation, and the obsession with restoring a damaged. Watkins has also mentioned classic monster movies such as Frankenstein and The Invisible Man as influences. And suddenly, Clayface starts to make much more sense. This isn't simply a movie about a guy who turns into a pile of clay. It's potentially a modern monster story about identity, appearance, obsession, and the horrifying consequences of trying to become someone you're not. Will Clayface actually work? Personally, I think the concept is extremely promising. The biggest advantage is that the filmmakers aren't trying to make another generic superhero movie. They're taking one of Batman's weirdest villains and asking a very simple question. What would it actually feel like to lose your human identity? If the movie focuses on Matt Hagen as a person before completely embracing the monster, the transformation could actually be tragic, rather than simply disgusting. And that's where Tom Rhys-Harris could have a lot to work with. Naomi Aki, Max Minghella, and Eddie Marsan also join the cast, giving the film a strong ensemble around its central character. The teaser certainly suggests that DC isn't afraid to get disturbing with this one. Clayface could be one of the biggest surprises of 2026. It's a Batman villain movie without necessarily being a traditional Batman movie. It's a superhero film that wants to be horror. And most importantly, it's a story about a man who may become a monster long before he actually looks like one. We'll find out when Clayface arrives in theaters on October 23rd, 2026. But if you're a fan of DC, Batman, psychological horror, or classic monster movies, this is definitely one to keep an eye on. What do you think? Could Clayface become one of the best DC movies of the new era? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more movie reviews, theories, and upcoming DC news. See you in the next one.
No idea what side effects you'll have.
What's happening to me?